Welcome to Beneath Your Beautiful, where guests share stories of adversity and perseverance, which inspire, encourage, and challenge us. We embrace these tough conversations, intimately exploring our loves, fears, and hopes with a delicious combination of depth and lightness. Well, hi, everybody. I am Rev Ronnie Roll. I am an ordained interfaith minister. I'm also schooled in conflict resolution studies. And so I work with couples all the way from birth through transformation, not just to find love, but also how to renew it and how to reconnect with it and how to find it in different parts of our life. And it's all come as a result of my personal journey. What do you mean from birth? When I think in terms of people and learning how we become humans and how to be loving humans, those lessons really begin all the way at birth. We are a lot of times given the beginnings of what love looks like from our parents, whether our parents choose to hold us or they choose to let us cry for hours and hours. We learn through those kinds of lessons. And so it begins there. But as an ordained interfaith minister, obviously I am involved in doing baptisms. And so that is again about acceptance and open love into a family that's much bigger than we can ever imagine at the age of 3 months? So you're teaching the parents what love looks like. Is that what you're saying? It is a scenario of teaching parents what love can look like from multiple perspectives, because if we don't learn self-love, we cannot give what we don't know. Mm-hmm. And so we really need to start early on with what self-love looks like. Many times we get into a relationship, we get into it for the wrong reasons. We're looking for somebody else to love us and that they need to love us the way we think they should love us. And we can't really have those expectations of others. And so we have to really start with self-love. That's something that begins early on as a child, things that we learn by watching others from the scenarios that exist around us. And we will either use them as positive role models or as negative ones. And hopefully the child is smart enough to see that they're negative role models sometimes so that they can unlearn what they learned early on. Mm-hmm. The more I accept myself, the more I'm so accepting of the world and gracious. But I was sexually abused when I was very young, and my mother didn't do anything about it. Or it seemed to me that she didn't do anything about it. I was obviously too young to know if she tried to do anything about it. The person was allowed to keep coming over. That's why I felt like nothing was done about it. And that taught me, or I believed about myself, that I didn't matter. My body didn't belong to me. I took away, I wasn't worthy. And so it came to me a lot later that I am worthy of love, my own love, most of all. And so you also had an abusive childhood, is that correct? I did. And it was multiple forms of abuse. It wasn't just physical, it was sexual, it was emotional. So it really also came to me from multiple members of the family. Each had their own specialty, if you will. I think that they were better at doling out. Even abandonment from the fact that my father knew that some of this was taking place. And his way of dealing with it all was to take a job where he would be traveling 5 days a week and be gone. Mm-hmm. So there were those moments where the one person who potentially could have stopped it all chose not to. Mm-hmm. It took me a good long time for me to get to a point where I could confront a lot of my abusers. In fact, I was 18 and I realized that when I went away to college, that I had all these negative role models and that I was going to need to find a better way because I didn't know who I was. And I often found in my own thoughts that when I was trying to come to some sort of resolution or make a decision, it was often based on what would mom do? Not what do I want, but what would mom do? Because my mother was the strong figure in the house. She also was one of the most prevalent abusers, if you will. She was an active alcoholic and incredibly violent when she was, and also very emotionally and verbally abusive when she was drunk. So it got to a point where in order to be able to survive, you had to figure out what would mom want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
But, at 18, when you're out living on your own, now is that time when you should be able to think about, what do I want?
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't. So I was smart enough at that point to seek out a counselor and to also start taking courses in college on parenting, on family social science, because I realized I'd seen all the wrong models. So what were the right ones? What was I supposed to be doing? And I knew that in the course of my life, I didn't know what I really wanted to do, but I knew that the one thing I wanted was to be a mother. If I was going to be a mother and not do the same things that I saw, how was I going to parent? What was I going to do differently? And so that was really what began the front part of the formal education that ultimately I led to, was by starting to take those kinds of classes. And I remember at the end of my parenting class, our final paper was to create basically what was the theory behind how we were going to parent. And I came up with my own theory of what I felt a child needed in order to become a successful adult. And many, many years later, after I had my own children and they were almost full grown, I found that paper and realized that I had lived by my theory. And my boys now were going to be graduating from high school. I had been a single mom. I had done what I thought I was going to do, and I could prove that it was successful.
I kind of have the opposite. Things that I didn't like about my mother, for instance, when she got mad at you, she wouldn't talk to you. I swore I'd never do that. And it's definitely what I do. But I feel like it's giving myself a timeout. Like I don't want to say anything that I'll be regretting later. And so I sort of understand it better why she maybe didn't chat right then, like gave herself a minute to compose herself.
None of us are perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Even those people in my life who did abuse me, I realize why they did it. I understand how they came to it. Doesn't necessarily make it right.
Mm-hmm.
But what it does do is it gives me empathy for them and to be able to find a way to still love them. And my mother ultimately was my bestest friend in the world. And when she passed away, when I was just 28, I lost so much in my life. And to this day, I miss her. And I've now lived more of my life without my mother than I ever did with her. And that's sad for me.
Yeah.
She ultimately did find her sobriety, and we had 12 years of her not drinking.
That's wonderful.
Yes. And so she really did have an opportunity with me to do a lot of healing. We can always hold out hope.
My mom passed away when I was 18. And so I had a lifetime of longing and no resolution. But I have finally come on my own to understanding, loving, forgiving all of her choices. She was a single mom with 6 kids, and there was only 9 years between the oldest and the youngest. There was 3 fathers in there. I could barely do it with 2 kids. So I have a lot of sympathy now for her, rather than the 30-year-old me just was so upset with her and longing for the mother I never had. I love the mother-daughter complex relationship. It's fascinating to me.
It is. And it's also a beautiful one.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I learned early on that your children are never going to think that you are the perfect parent, no matter what you do.
No kidding.
Part and parcel to their growing up, to be able to separate and identify themselves as who they are, separate from who the parents are.
Mm-hmm.
My sons to this day will tell you it was not easy being my child. And the reason was that I had high expectations of my children. I didn't care what they decided they wanted to be, but they needed to be the best they could be at it. And there was no letting loose on that. So if you told me you were going to be, one of them wanted to be a a sports announcer. Great. Well, then you're going to be the best darn sports announcer around. And I'm going to make sure that you have everything you need, including me pushing you to be that best. So it was challenging. They often thought that my perfectionist streak was being put on them. And that made it very difficult to be my child.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think in terms of they're not in a position to understand why it was that I was like that. And it was because statistically, a single mom raising two boys, the statistics are those kids are going to end up on drugs. They're going to end up being kicked out of school, being in trouble with the police, the principal. And I was doing everything I could to beat those odds. We all have rough patches in our life, and it really is, how do we process that? How do we take the lessons learned and use them for good? Joseph Campbell, in life, sometimes your mess becomes your message.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard that the first time, it was like bells and whistles went off in my head. Yes, my whole life has been a mess when it comes to understanding what love is and what it's not. And now, because of all of those rough patches in my life, the bad relationships, all those kinds of things, I've really gained clarity as to what love really is and what it's not, and how to really turn our relationships into positive things. And we can affect change ourselves in our relationships. We don't necessarily have to have a partner who agrees that we're going to sit down, we're going to work darn hard on this and make it all shift. We can begin to make shifts by shifting things in ourselves.
I think you can only shift something in yourself. Don't you think that? You can't control anybody else. You can't make anybody do anything. The answer always lies within you only. Do you think that?
I think there's a misnomer that we can make other people change. If you look at alcoholism, it affects so many more people around the alcoholic in deeper ways than the alcoholic is even affected. And those who are codependent learn a whole world of coping mechanisms, ways to stay safe, ways to stay out of trouble. And some of those mean that we learn coping mechanisms that are not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
We learn things like how to be quiet so that we don't get seen, how to be quiet so that we don't provoke. And so we become conflict avoidant. That's just one of those ways that we pick up how we move now into a relationship later on in life and figure that that's the way that worked before. So now it should work again. No, what we learned was how to deal with the alcoholic when the alcoholic was drinking. What happens then when the alcoholic stops drinking? We still are using those same coping mechanisms now, and it doesn't work with that person because the illness is what we were really responding to and not the person at all. And so now we move into a new relationship and we carry the old stuff with us.
Do you consider yourself a love expert?
Oh, I have a tough time with the word expert. I explain it this way. I have had a lifetime of experiences that have taught me a tremendous amount of wisdom. And I'm more than happy to share that with people. Expert is a word I think the ego really likes more than I do. And so there was a time in my life when I was on the stage, and yes, I said I was an expert in what I used to do. Today, no, I don't like that word for me.
I like as we get older, we get less experty.
Yes.
Yet we realize we don't know everything.
I think we become more aware of all the gray areas in life, right?
Yeah.
And to see the positive and negative to scenarios, to people, be able to look within another and not just see the woundedness in them, but to also see the good.
I think that there's good in everybody. we were young and precious and perfect. And before the world got to us, we're all that little kid still. We just are older with experiences. So at one point, Jeffrey Dahmer was this most beautiful little kid that the mother loved and adored. So do you think there's good in everybody, even those that do bad?
Well, now I'm going to step into my spiritual side because I believe that God exists in everyone and everything around us. And so if God exists in every one of us, then there is good in every one of us. I think in terms of our hearts being a lot like a prism, there are beautiful shades of color that come from that prism. And sometimes what happens is life will cause that prism to chip. And where there is a chip, it's not able to reflect all the beautiful colors of the rainbow. And instead, what we see is darkness. And so I believe that even within someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, a Hitler, someone of that nature, there still is good. Mm-hmm. But is it repressed on a very strong level? Yes. Can it be undone? Perhaps. But it takes a lot of work. And it takes a lot of conviction on the person to want to change. A lot of that woundedness has been built upon by multiple people, multiple times over more time than you could imagine. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to take layers to undo. I'm also a teacher of heart rhythm meditation. And one of the things that we talk about is that in meditation, you may very well have one particular scenario that keeps coming up and you do the work around it and then it comes up again. And you go, by gosh, why is this coming up again? Well, because there's another angle that needs to be looked at this time. And I've had this own experience where there's been one particular event in my life that I have had to rework and rework and rework. And I thought I had completely worked every angle possible, everybody who had been part of that scenario, only to find that there was the one person who had not been there that I now needed to work it with. That was something that was probably 20 years of working on, off and on, in order to finally be in a place where spiritually I was able to finally lay it to rest.
How do you help people? I mean, exactly, like what do you do?
Well, as an ordained interfaith minister, I work a lot with couples that are looking to get married. They're looking to make a deep commitment to another person. And rather than necessarily digging into their childhood and putting them on medications and things of that nature to try to deal with their woundedness from childhood, what I try to do is to work with them from the perspective of taking a look at how it may be affecting them today. How is their relationship functioning now? We walk into a new relationship aware of who we are and what we bring. What are our strengths? What are our undeveloped strengths? Which for other people, they might call a weakness. I don't call them weaknesses. Much like your bicep, if you don't use it, it just doesn't get stronger. So in premarital education, we talk about what is this commitment that we're making? Why are we making it? Is it something that we really believe, or is it something that was put on us, that this is what your next step in life has to look like? In prior generations, that was the case. Women were expected. This is what you do. You grow up, you go to high school, you go to college, not to get a degree in anything, but to find your husband. We called it an MRS degree. And so we did that because women couldn't have a credit card. You couldn't own real estate in your own name. You couldn't even go to a doctor and be taken seriously unless your husband or father was with you. And so women in prior generations got married because they needed to. In order to exist, they needed somebody to take care of them, to pay their bills financially. And mom and dad wouldn't be able to do that forever because of their own mortality. Therefore, it would become the responsibility of a husband. Men, on the other hand, got married because they wanted to have sex. And the women weren't going to have sex until they were married. in addition to that, in their careers, companies usually look to promote men who were stable, both at home as well as at work. So if they had a wife, if they had a couple of children, then that looked like this was a guy who had his act together. He would be a good leader. He would be able to help people. And so he would be promoted. So we had all these reasons then. Now we don't have those reasons at all. We can have sex, we can live together, we can make babies, we can even die and leave everything to somebody else and never have to say, I do.
Mm-hmm.
So why do we make that commitment now? What is it that we're doing? Why are we doing it? We talk also about what are your go-to styles for conflict resolution? Because if our parents never fought in front of us, we go, oh, they had a perfect relationship. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they chose not to fight in front of the children. Well, unfortunately, then children don't learn how to process conflict. On the other hand, you can have parents who fight like cats and dogs in front of you, and they are screaming and they are passionate about things. And then 5 minutes later, it's as if nothing ever happened. And what do the children learn from that? Do they learn that screaming and fighting like that and being maybe, very physical with your hands being up in the air and talking with your hands and that kind of thing, that's a way that you resolve conflict? And now you carry that into a relationship with somebody who's maybe conflict avoidant. Mm. And they see you screaming and hollering and using your hands to make gestures. And now all of a sudden they're afraid because that's not what they're used to. So how can we find those styles that work for the two of you together? How can we find healthy ways to resolve conflict? But what if we could also prevent conflict before we go in? What if we learn what I call bumper bowling in a relationship? Before we get married, what are those areas of really black and white for you, where if a line is crossed, you just can't come back from? Mm-hmm. Right? And when a couple is looking at getting married, a lot of times they're influenced by things such as childhood fairy tales and Disney movies that we get married and then right after the ceremony, the sun is setting behind us and there are doves carrying ribbons behind us and the music is all angelic and life is going to be wonderful as we now go off into our sunset together. Well, that might be the day you get married and then the day after. At that point, what we really need to do is get to the reality of what is a marriage. What does it take for two people who are human, but we are expecting to have this perfect relationship? Mm-hmm. How is that ever going to work, that two imperfect people can have a perfect relationship? They can't. What they can have is the perfect relationship for them. Mm-hmm. So now what might that look like for this couple? And so I work with them to design their happily ever after.
I wish I had taken a parenting class, and I wish I had that in my first marriage. We wouldn't have gotten we would never have gotten married had we talked to you. That would have been good though.
Well, I don't necessarily discourage couples from getting married. There may be things that I see that are challenges for them in their relationship, but I do believe that people have the capacity to make change in their life. And I might very well be stopping somebody from a tremendous amount of growth in their own life if I open up my mouth and say, you guys shouldn't get married.
No, I don't think you would have said that. I think you would have asked us questions and we would have had to really look at who we were and that we were not compatible. That's all. We weren't compatible from the minute go, but we still got married. What I think now happened was I was scared. I was motherless and I was alone in the world and I latched on. In 4 months of dating, we were in counseling. We were not compatible. We were not supposed to be together, although I have 2 wonderful children. And also he's taught me a lot of lessons and I don't regret it now, but I don't think had we taken a course and had real conversations instead of just tumbleweeding through life, we would have really realized that maybe we weren't the right partners for each other.
Yeah. And I tend not to try to guess whether or not somebody belongs together or not. For me, it's really about giving them the tools to be able to work through whatever happens in their life.
Yeah.
And the Gottman Institute, for instance, will tell you that there are basically two kinds of conflict in any relationship. There's the resolvable conflict, and then there's the non-resolvable conflicts. And you can have a couple who is perfectly happily married, and they have non-resolvable conflicts. It's all in how we reframe them. It's how we learn to live with those choices. Let's go back to having maybe a partner who is an active alcoholic. I've met spouses that are wonderfully joyful and happy in their life because they've learned now. This isn't about me. This is about that person, their journey, and how things work for them. And I have learned to set appropriate boundaries in my marriage so that I stay safe, I stay healthy, and I don't get pulled in to the drama, to all of the things that alcoholism, for instance, can lead to. A couple sitting down in the beginning, it's really about being able to rise above some of that enamoredness, that what is called limerence. Limerence lasts about 2 to 3 years, where we really see each other in rose-colored glasses. We watch our pupils get big. These are the people that spend a lot more time looking at each other than married couples that are doing dishes, having conversations, staring out windows, talking to kids, playing with the dogs, and not really relating to each other the way a young couple does when they first come together. This couple believes, of course, that love and marriage is unconditional. I will love you forever. And that may very well be true. You can love somebody forever and still not accept some of the behaviors, but can you stay married? And so, sometimes when I have a young couple that says marriage is forever, maybe sometimes that's the answer they think I want to hear. And then I go, okay, so when you say until death do us part, you mean that at your spouse's hand. And I get this wide-eyed look. And I go, seriously, would you stay married if your partner is beating the heck out of you? Well, no. Okay, now we can have a real conversation. Now you're willing to talk about the boundaries to your relationship and what are healthy ones.
I can see that now that you're saying that maybe had we had some kind of counseling and had some tools, you're offering tools. That's great.
They are tools. I consider myself more a relationship educator. And even couples that I work with that are going through difficult times in their life, I can invariably take a look at where they are. And had they had good premarital education, they would have had the skills, the tools to not have caused the hurt, the woundedness that has already happened. One of the things a lot of people don't understand is what the true term interfaith means. A lot of times they think interfaith is really what some people call non-denominational Christian. So instead of being just one particular brand of Christianity, it might be multiple kinds of Christianity. No, for me, interfaith is truly interfaith. So when I went through seminary, I had to study not just Christianity in all of its forms, but also Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Native American spirituality, Church of Scientology, atheism, agnosticism, and a lot of other world religions. So a lot of my couples and people that I work with come from very different belief systems. I'm also educated in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I work with couples that are bringing cultural differences into their relationships. And as an interfaith minister, we are really educated in how do we bring people together more than how do we separate them by our differences. And so the ceremonies that I create are designed to do just that. And when they arise within couples, whether it's something that's culturally from your own family, this is how your family culture operates, all the way through, this is literally the ethnic culture that I come from. Maybe I'm first generation. And so now I have to walk this fine line between what my parents' expectations are what my societal expectations are, what my partner's expectations are, and what I want. How do we bring all those pieces together and be able to celebrate love in all of its different forms? As we talk about finding the love within, if we find the ability to rise above our own existence sometimes and see ourselves as a child in the world, separate from ourselves, what would we do to encourage that child to find happiness, to find love? What would we say if we knew that child was as wounded as we are? And then give those things to ourselves. So if we see a child that just needs to be hugged, and guess what? That child isn't getting hugged. Maybe we hug ourselves. And what would that hug look like if we could hug ourselves? What would we tell that child every day when they wake up, first thing in the morning? You're beautiful. You have the most incredible smile. See the God in that little child. See the Godness in yourself.
Yeah, that is exactly how I learned to love myself. Is my daughter said a number of years ago, she hated her body. And I was horrified. One, because I knew she was repeating me. She had learned it from me. And two, because she was perfect. She could be 1,000 pounds and I would think she's beautiful. And then it occurred to me that I was somebody's little baby once and somebody's child and deserved that same kind of love for myself that I was showing my daughter. And I started to be kind to myself and talk to myself the way you're saying. I play tennis with ladies and they're often very berating of themselves when they miss the shot or whatever. And in my head, I'm always like, oh, good job, Hara. Good try. You'll do better next time. I talk to myself as if I was a little girl because I am. I think we are all the little kids we once were. We're just older. That is the answer, I think, to self-love, is to remember that you are a precious miracle.
I, for many years, felt like I was a very old spirit and that I had lived way too long in such a short period of time. And there was a photograph that was taken of me when I was just 2.5 years old. And in this photograph, I'm in nothing but a little pair of white panties because, of course, we took those kinds of pictures back then. And I was covered from head to toe in spots everywhere. But I was this little towhead of a girl with all these beautiful white curls everywhere. And I had the most amazing smile on my face. And I've always loved that photograph of myself. Now, the reason why I had all those spots was because I was covered from head to toe in chicken pox. I also had eczema. I had a fever of 104. But because of that smile being so beautiful, I have spent what I would say the biggest share of my life trying to get back to that little girl. And I carry that picture. It sits on my desktop of my computer where I can see her every day.
Yeah, me too.
I have done the work to get me there.
Yeah, me too. My background is me as a little girl because I'm constantly reminded that I'm lovable, perfect. I've made some questionable choices, but that doesn't mean I'm any less lovable. And I had to really learn how to love myself. I didn't feel lovable for the longest time, but now I know I'm worthy of it for me to love me, and which is, I think, the most important thing.
I could never have, in my wildest imagination, imagined this was going to be my life. It seemed like as it was unfolding early on, it was just all this disjointed stuff. But in 1999 was when I got struck by lightning and got my calling to the ministry. And it changed a lot of things for me. I was not a spiritual person at that point, not the way most people define it. Yeah, I had a belief, but I didn't go to church on a regular basis. It wasn't anything like that. You really don't know where your life is going to happen to take you. Even for years after that, in my meditations, in my prayers, the question was always, why me? And I didn't get an answer for a very long time. And then one day I did. Why not you? And then all of a sudden, in retrospect, I could see how all these different things, these life experiences, had prepared me to be the best person to do what I'm doing now, to be able to help people the way I help them now. Had I not lived through bad marriages, bad relationships, I would not have the skill set to know how to help people circumvent these things. I would not be able to see them as clearly as I do, as quickly as I do, right? And so these are beautiful things that if we can step aside from them and see the lessons in them, rather than just thinking, oh, poor me, life has treated me rotten. Well, no, life has given you tremendous opportunities for growth, to learn, and to become even better than you already are. And the question becomes, are you willing to pick up that gauntlet, or are you going to leave it?
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Beneath Your Beautiful, hosted by Hara Allison. And thank you for your ratings and reviews. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Stay tuned.